Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It sounds like the revolution has already come to Minnesota. I want to thank Kurt for that very nice introduction, and I do want to emphasize Mary Ann Stebbins as all the work that she has done to help organize this and many other freedom-oriented events. Also, I'd like to introduce my wife, who's sitting over here, Carol. And we have one of our 18 grandchildren, and she's sitting with her, and that's Linda. But it is great to see a nice crowd and a lot of enthusiasm for a very special issue, something dear to my heart, and that is liberty. If government is the opposite of liberty, especially when they avoid doing the things they're supposed to, the government in our country, and especially, was created to protect liberty. Unfortunately, in these last several decades, I'm afraid they have been misled, and they are stealing our liberty from us. But something pretty big is happening in this country, not only with this election, but there's a change in sentiment. There's a lot of enthusiasm now for the cause of more freedom and less government, less war, and a free market economy. We do a fair amount of criticizing the current administration, which deserves it. But our problems didn't occur in the last 3 years. Our problems have been around for a long time. And unfortunately, it's been a bipartisan affair too often. There's been, in a way, too much compromise in Washington. They say, no, you need more compromise. But if they compromise on doing the wrong things, it's not worth very much. And this is what's happened. You know, conservatives and Republicans might want to spend money in one way, and liberals and Democrats might want to spend the money in the other way, so they get together and agree to it. And then they agree on a monetary system that facilitates it. Oh, well, you can tax, but there's a limit that people might object. You can borrow, but there's a limit, or interest rates would go up. But then they had this crazy scheme that they came up with in 1913, and they said, well, what we need to do is make sure the money isn't backed by anything, make sure it's just paper, and then we can create it endlessly. And, of course, that has led us to this trouble we have today. This is the reason the founders were explicit during the Constitutional Convention and putting into the Constitution that they didn't want to have runaway inflation again because they had it at the beginning of our history. And that is why they said that the states only could use gold and silver as legal tender. And they placed an explicit prohibition against printing money, which was called emitting bills of credit. And they gave no authority for the Federal Reserve System. So if we ever want to get our economy back on foot again, which is an absolute necessity, we cannot do it without addressing the subject of the monetary system, the subject of the Federal Reserve, and it should begin with an absolute, complete auditing of the Fed to find out who their buddies are and who they've been bailing out. So much of our problems with big government came from 1913 on, and especially in 1971 when the last link to gold was removed. And that meant there were no limits whatsoever. And look at any economic chart about what's happened since 71. The expansion of government, the expansion of debt, the price inflation, the many wars that we've been fighting. It's exponential growth since there are no limits, except the market is also very powerful too. Governments are powerful, but markets are even more powerful because there is a limit to how much money you can print, because eventually trust is lost, and I believe this is what we have done. We've entered into a phase in these last 4 years where it's been recognized that this debt and this financing and the printing of money cannot be sustained. So our efforts now to return to sound economic policies, return to our Constitution, is more vital and more necessary than ever before. So if liberty is the cause, we have to restrain the government. That is what the founders gave us. They gave us a document that placed no restraints on the people, but put restraints on the federal government. Today, it's been turned around. The federal government is putting restraints on the people, and they have turned the government into a secret operation. It should be the opposite. We should have full exposure, not only of the Fed, but the full exposure of our government. And of course, if we want our secrecy back and our privacy back, I would think that we would have to restore the Fourth Amendment, which means that we would have to repeal the Patriot Act. You know, the problems that we have had since 9/11 have been significant, and now it was a bad day for all Americans because many Americans died, and it was a very, very tough time. I was supportive of going after those individuals who were responsible, and we should have done it, and we did do it. But unfortunately, it provided an opportunity for our government to do a lot of things they shouldn't have done and used it as an excuse. And for instance, this was their excuse to do something that they had been waiting to do, and that was to invade and overthrow the government of Iraq. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. That war was totally unnecessary, and it was based on false assumptions and lies. Now, there was a simple little procedure placed in the Constitution to try to prevent wars of that sort. The provision is simply that presidents aren't allowed to go to war without a declaration of war. The Congress and the people, through their congressmen, are supposed to make these declarations. I was serving on the International Affairs Committee when the resolution was coming along to give this authority to the president. And it wasn't a declaration of war. So I said, look, this is going to lead to war. What they want to do is just give the authority to the president to do whatever he wanted, whatever he thought was necessary. And they had been wanting the war for about 6 or 7 years before this. My first speech against the oncoming war was in 1998 because it was announced by our administration that our policy was the overthrow of the government of Iraq. So when the debate came up, I offered an amendment to this blanket giving of authority to the president to do whatever he wanted. I offered an amendment that said to declare war. But when I discussed it, I said, I don't want the war. I'm going to vote against this amendment. But if you want the war, you should go to war in a proper fashion and vote it up or down. And, of course, they ridiculed this. They didn't want to vote. They voted, and the voice vote was all no. Nobody wanted to pass it. Then I forced them to have a recorded vote, which further annoyed them. They didn't want to be on record. And, of course, everybody voted against it. And in the discussion, the chairman of the committee explained that I was off-base to talk about the Constitution because he explained it to me. He says that part of the Constitution is anachronistic. We don't follow it anymore. And unfortunately, because they've been able to get away with things like that, whether it's the monetary policy or going to war, this Constitution, in a way, has become anachronistic. If we're going to have rule of law, if we're going to have peace and prosperity, we have to force the people who represent us, the president on down, send only people there who know how to read and know how to understand and will take their oath of office seriously. But because we have delivered so much power to the executive branch, we go to war without declaration. We have delivered the legislative process to the executive branch. Technically, under our Constitution, only the legislative body, the Congress, writes laws. But just think of all the regulations. Just think of the Federal Register, thousands and thousands of pages, and every year the numbers go up. I would like to be the first president that actually shrunk the size of the Federal Register. Even the courts legislate. We don't live within the confines of the Constitution, and unless we do, we will continue in this process. Go to war that are undeclared, spend money that we don't have, print the money that we don't have. But we have to change our appetite for big government. We have to ask the questions the founders asked. What should the role of government be in a free society? And they came up with the conclusion that it should be very, very limited. We'll write restraints on the federal government and say you can't do this. The Constitution was written precisely to restrain the federal government, although they wanted the colonies to come together in one unit. And at the same time, they wanted to restrain the government. They wanted to put no restraints on the people. But unfortunately, we have gone in the wrong direction, especially in the last 100 years, and especially since 1971. But the time has come that it's very evident something dramatic has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. Although there's been several of us talking about this for a long time, the dramatic revelation occurred with this collapse of the economy, with this suicidal approach of just spending money and not cutting anything and printing money and think it's going to work forever. We had an economic crisis come upon us because we had too much government, too much spending, too much debt, too much taxation, too much regulation, too many wars. And what do? They try to solve the problems with doing exactly the same thing. It's not going to work, and that's why we have to change our direction. In Washington, they talk a little bit about the budget, but they do nothing. They talk about cutting spending, but they don't. They're not telling the truth. They're talking about, that Congress couldn't do it, the super committee couldn't do it, so they turned it over to an automatic cut of $1 trillion over 10 years. Automatic cut on the automatic increases of $10 trillion. They're going to cut $1 trillion out of the increases, and they call that a radical cut, an extreme cut, and they're fighting each other on trying to prevent which cuts are going to happen. That's $100 billion a year of cutting only proposed increases. Our national debt is going up $100 billion every month. So my solution, or at least the beginning of the solution, is to cut the budget by $1 trillion in 1 year. There you go. Some people get a little bit nervous about the government not spending the money, but I'll tell you what, don't get nervous if the government would quit spending $1 trillion. They don't know how to spend the money. It's always spent politically. They do the wrong things, and we get hit twice. They take it from us. That's one hit. Then when they spend it, all they do is come down hard on us with more regulations. So there's nothing wrong with this whole economic moral principle of saying that you have the right to spend the money. You spend $1 trillion, and you spend it your way, not the way of the politician. And this can be defended on constitutional grounds and moral grounds and economic grounds, that the politicians and the bureaucrats are not smart enough to know how to spend your money. And it's based on the principle of individual liberty. We get our rights in a natural way, or a God-given right. We get our life and we get our liberty. And we ought to be able to keep the fruits of our labor under those circumstances. Therefore, instead of thinking cutting government spending by $1 trillion is a detriment, it's a blessing, it's a help. It will be spent, the money would be spent more wisely. And the allocation of credit would be the same thing. Today, the Federal Reserve does everything to say that they will allocate credit to their friends in the bubble formation and to their friends when the bubble bursts and they need their bailout. At the same time, individuals, middle-class people, people who don't want to speculate in the stock market, and they want to assume responsibility and save money. So what do? They put their money in a CD. And Bernanke literally laughs at people and says, well, the fact that they only get 1 or 2%, that's unfortunate, but we have to take care of those who are going to stimulate the economy and give the money to the bankers. So what we need, the allocation of credit should come from the marketplace, and the people should be encouraged to save, but there's no encouragement today. What do? They take money and say we're going to take care of the elderly when they retire and we're going to have Social Security benefits. At the same time, they're wishing for, and they deliberately debase the currency, which is a moral and economic issue. So the people receiving benefits right now, are they keeping up with the cost of living? No, they're losing. But if you ask Bernanke and crew over there, they say, oh no, inflation is only 1 or 2%. Don't worry about it. But what if your inflation is 6 or 8%? Somebody's stealing from you. It's theft. The founders called it counterfeiting. But because the government is too big, we have to ask a couple of questions. We have to ask, once again, what should the role of government be? Should it be to operate in an entitlement system? A lot of people in this country have come to believe that entitlements is equivalent to having a right, and we should sort that all out. You have a right to your life in a natural way. You don't get your life or your liberties from the government. You get them in a natural way. And we should say that the entitlement system is not a moral right. Entitlement means the government's going to give you something for free. Oh, the government can give you free education, free food, free housing, free medical care. Where does the government get anything? They've never produced a thing. The only thing the government can do is steal it from productive individuals and give it to another one. It's totally destructive. Where we have a right to our own life and should have the right to the products of our labor, you don't have a right to your neighbor's wealth. You can't go in and steal from your neighbor just because they have more than you do. But you shouldn't have the right to send a politician or a congressman to go into your neighbor's house and take what they have because you want it. It's not right, it's not fair, and it doesn't work. But if we want to give those who want the redistribution of wealth, the benefit of the doubt, many of them are well motivated. They really care about the poor, and they don't understand economics. They don't understand how government destroys the production of wealth. So they really want to help people. And take, for instance, the housing. Well, it's nice. Everybody should have a house, even if they can't afford it. So they devise this system, print a lot of money, pass out the money, and have affirmative action programs. You force banks to give loans to people who don't qualify, and then you give special benefits to organizations like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, where their executives make hundreds of millions of dollars, and then everybody will get a house. And the number of people who had houses actually went up. But also, there were a lot of people making a lot of money on this. The people who were churning the credit, the people in the mortgage markets, the people in the building trades, the people that got into the derivatives business, and they were doing great. And the houses kept going up in prices. It sounded like a perpetual money machine. And how could it ever go wrong? The people could keep borrowing against these rising prices, except for one thing. Austrian free market economics knew exactly what was going on. They understood it clearly and said, it will not last. This is an artificial bubble created by the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Congress, and it would collapse, and it did. A characteristic of systematic debasement of a currency if that's all you were dealing with is just debasement of a currency and devaluations, the middle class suffers, the wealthy benefits because there's a transfer of wealth. The people in the middle class get to use the money last, and that's when it has less value, and prices go up and they pay the inflation tax. But the people who get the money first, the government, the politicians who get to use it, big business and big banks, and the military-industrial complex, they get to use the money first, so they have an advantage. But what happens when the bubble collapses? Because they are so in charge, because the special interests have so much charge of the monetary system and the system of our foreign policy, they will yell and scream and they say, there's a depression coming, there's a depression coming, we need bailout, if you don't do this, we'll have a depression. And they were right about one thing. There would have been a depression for the rich people, they would have gone bankrupt, but instead they got the bailouts and we got the bankruptcy. So the middle class bore the burden of assuming the debt, and the big banks got bailed out. But it's still in process. They still want to do this. The only limiting factor right now is the fact that there's going to be an economic limit to how many dollars can be printed. We did in the bailout, the Congress appropriated $1 trillion. That's getting to be a fair sum of money. But the Fed was involved with $15 or $16 trillion of churning credit and bailing out their friends, domestic and international governments and banks. And they're still in the position to do this, and they're behind the scenes promising Europe, well, we'll be there, the dollar will take care of it. The dollar's and our credit's been devalued once already. It's getting ready to be devalued again. And people are starting to wake up and say, you can't keep printing money and spending money and run up debt and think you can bail out the world. No more than we can be the policeman of the world. We can't be the financial caretaker of the world either. So we have to be prepared for what's happening, and fortunately, the people in this country are stirring, and this election is changing a tone. It's the first time in a 100-year history of the Federal Reserve that the Federal Reserve has become an issue in this campaign. But if we reject the notion of the failed policy of the entitlement welfare state, which we're in the midst and people are realizing it's failing, even those on the receiving end are getting pretty worried too, because they know this can't continue. But we also have to ask our question about the foreign policy. The Constitution is rather clear. The President is the commander-in-chief, and we should have a strong national defense. We should defend our country. We should have, a protection of national security, and that is a precise function that we should have. But that is one area where we don't have to worry very much right now, because we have the strongest military in the history of the world. There's no power in the world. Even if they all got together, we are so powerful because we have more weaponry than everybody else put together. So we are not going to be attacked. Nobody's on the verge of invading us. And yet, what are we doing? We have distorted things by distorting our defense, because not only do we allow our presidents to go to war, we're allowing our presidents to go to war under NATO and UN resolutions. That's wrong. But what we have to do is decide that how much engagement we should have around the world. I think we should have plenty. It should be engagement with trade and friendship and travel and expressing of ideas. I always find it interesting that those who will challenge our views on non-intervention in foreign policy will say, oh, you guys are a bunch of isolationists. Actually, it's the opposite of isolation. We don't want to build fences and borders and tariffs and all this. They usually are the ones who want to put on the sanctions and the tariffs, and then they call us the isolationists. Matter of fact, I don't know if you've listened to the debates, I've been very explicit about who the real isolationists are. It's the ones who are resisting our efforts to open up diplomatic relationships and trade with Cuba. That's what we need to be doing.
You're listening to Ron Paul as he's speaking to some of his supporters far, far away, like 1,300 miles away. He's happy today.